Thank you to both Sybil and Brooke for bringing us to this point. We do realize that we have a difficult topic to learn about and that some may be uncomfortable with parts of this research. So for those who have been either directly affected or who are sensitive to the information, we have provided a list of resources that may be of assistance on the discussion board. As previously discussed, to complete our project, we had to learn about several relevant factors which contributed to our overall knowledge base. Many historical criminologists have proposed that serial murder has previously transpired, but cases have not been adequately reported and therefore no proper documentation of these events exist. However, the United States did not record its first serial killer until the early 1890s with the notorious H.H. Holmes. Since this occurrence, 76% of all known serial killers in the 20th century originated from the United States. Additionally, the term serial killer originated from FBI agent Robert Ressler in 1981. Until this time, these individuals were categorized as mass murderers. When reviewing the age, race, and sex demographics of our sample, our findings align with the findings of other research. The age demographic of our sample confirmed that these individuals are typically in their 20s to 40s. We found that subjects were predominantly male, with the proportion being about 9-to-1 male to female. Additionally, our sample confirmed that this population is primarily Caucasian, with other minority groups growing in representation, the second highest being African American. Continuing, we also noted the active duration and number of convictions for each murderer. The duration of killing had a very interesting time fluctuation with a range of 1 to 19 years and a mean of about 9 years of activity. This time was influenced by a few different factors. First, some of the murderers had previous convictions and had been sent to jail for a number of years, but they were not subjected to life sentences, and so upon release, they began hunting for new victims. Second, there were also 2 outliers who spanned at least 17 years of continuous activity. So those pushed our numbers out further. One factor that we did not gather specific data on was the victim population. We did note that victims were typically young females, particularly prostitutes, or other vulnerable populations, such as children or the elderly, who were alone. Moving on, typologies are typically utilized by law enforcement, researchers, and clinicians to describe the tendencies and rationalization of a serial murderer. One researcher, Rappaport, provided 5 descriptors of identification. The most prevalent typology noted in our sample was sexually sadistic killers. These individuals were identified when they specifically sought victims for sadomasochistic or sexual fantasies. The next most common typology was spree killers, who were individuals that killed within a specific time, such as like a few months or a few weeks, and they were largely done for the sake of personal desire. The next typology was psychotic killers, and this was classified by those who were internally motivated by distortions in thought, and this led them to completely neglect rationale. For example, one individual was linked to a number of rituals which appeared to be motivated by Satanism. The least common typology we had was custodial killers. Although these individuals appear less frequently, they can, though, be incredibly dangerous and easily concealed. These are the ones who accept the responsibility of caretaker but become executioners. The final typology, though, functionaries of organized crime, has been mentioned before. These are hitmen and assassins, and they were excluded from our research because of their atypical motivation. Childhood trauma was widely present in our study, existing in 85% of the individuals. This high prevalence may indicate the possible accentuation of the development of serial killers. This variable was further categorized into one of 6 subtypes of childhood trauma. The most prevalent was emotional abuse, which we defined as a pattern of behavior that impairs a child's emotional development or sense of self-worth, and could include rejection, hostility, criticism, exposure to family violence, or other things like that. These individuals witnessed and were subjected to emotionally scarring circumstances for the duration of their youth, resulting in a very tangible lack of empathy. The second most common was verbal abuse, which occurred when a child was repeatedly made to feel worthless, unloved, or was manipulated by a caregiver. This could include, but was not limited to, things like name calling, belittling, teasing, or bullying. And these individuals were subject to various levels of verbal coercion. And because they trusted the adults in their lives, they had a very gnarled sense of language. Sexual abuse or child molestation is a form of abuse in which an adult or other adolescent uses a child for sexual stimulation. So this could include engaging in sexual activities with a child, indecent exposure, sexual exploitation, or other things along those lines. These actions severely and negatively impact the psychological well-being of a child, inhibiting their ability to construct functioning relationships. The next most common was physical abuse, which involved inflicting physical harm or injury onto a child, usually as a result of deliberate attempt to hurt the child with cruel or malicious intent. This could include hitting, punching, beating, kicking, burning, severe shaking, or restraining. These instances where parents and caregivers were physically brutal resulted in a very distorted perception of violence and later exemplified with a complete disregard for human life. As stated earlier by Brooke, our study found that physical abuse was significantly related to the sexually sadistic typology. Abandonment was the next most common, and that was the act of neglecting a child, typically without any regard for their safety or welfare. And this could include a parent or guardian just physically leaving the child or severely neglecting them over time. Those who were victims of abandonment were likely to have developed very skewed perceptions of human worth. The final or other category was created to account for traumatic events that did not fit within these previously defined 5 categories. Regardless though, our study presented strong correlations suggesting the role childhood trauma may play in the development of serial killers. Although the experience may not directly create a killer, the persisting psychological and physical damage could potentially desensitize these individuals to the horrors of life. It is possible that by normalizing these traumatic environments, they may develop extreme hedonistic and masochistic behaviors, culminating in the destruction and violation of human life. And with that, we will transition to Lupita with the conclusion. Thanks, y'all.